Hey, it's Rachel, and this is the latest update in my 2025 experiment to see how much of a healthy diet I can produce out of a large backyard kitchen garden. This is the status as of the end of October. I'm filming in early November, and as you can see from behind me, we are definitely at the end of the growing season. We just had our first snow here in Southeast Michigan last night. To give you a sense of the boundaries around this experiment, here is a labeled overhead view of the 2025 garden plan. I grow my annual crops in 10 raised beds at the center, with perennial crops ringing the outer perimeter. I also have a chicken coop and run down in the northeast corner, housing 5 hens that only began laying this August. I am located in Southeast Michigan, growing in hardiness zone 6A, and I only have around 175 frost-free days from late April until about mid-October. We're located at about 42.5 degrees latitude, and I only have around 280 days where there are 10 hours or more of daylight to support active plant growth. Those begin on February 1st, but we then drop to less than 10 hours on November 9th, and the plant's growth slows to a near stop. In other words, basically right now. While I am almost completely done with the active phase of plant growth for the year, I did just only this week harvest my pole drying beans out of the garden. Those will have to wait until the November update for you guys to see those numbers. I'm also still getting a few fruits from the primo-cane crops of my raspberries and blackberries. I'm getting a couple of eggs every day, and I will continue to harvest my cold hardy salad greens for as long as they last. They are no longer regrowing with each harvest, and I will eventually just draw them down until there's nothing left. Speaking of salad greens, the crops that I am choosing to grow as part of this experiment are based on an anti-inflammatory diet. I was diagnosed with MS at the end of 2019, and since then I have focused on eating foods that combat inflammation, using 3 different protocols that have worked well for me. I won't go into great detail on those protocols, but they tend to emphasize the same things. And as a result, you'll see as I go through this that I emphasize eating a lot of leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, that's things in the broccoli family, along with berries, and just generally as many vegetables and fruits as possible. The protocols all emphasize trying to have local and organic produce, and they suggest reducing things like sugar, processed foods, dairy, and alcohol, as well as moderating the amount of meat that you eat. Now, we do still eat meat in moderation. I am not trying to produce that out of my suburban backyard. The bad news on eating this way is that a diet with a lot of local and organic produce in it can get very expensive very quickly, especially for a family. And for that reason, I try to produce as much of it as possible out of this garden. Here's a visual of the 40 plus different crops that I do grow back here. It's worth noting that while we eat meat, I make a point of serving a couple of bean or egg-based dinners each week instead of meat to further reduce costs and to boost our health. And I need the garden to support those meals specifically. Now, if somebody were trying to survive a zombie apocalypse, they might choose to grow different crops than these, but this garden does support a huge amount of our diet. In 2025, every day I weigh and document my harvests and convert those grams into servings to calculate the nutrition and the energy in calories that I'm getting out of the garden. In total, I have harvested over 4,800 servings of 43 different crops so far as of the end of October. I find those pie charts hard to read, and I prefer to use this Marimekko view to make it easier to see all the relative sizes of things. Here's the servings view. My largest category is on the left, smallest category on the right. I track berries as their own category, but even excluding those, you can see that my fruiting crops, shown in gray, like tomatoes and squash, are my largest category, and that paste tomatoes are by far the largest rectangle on the page. I harvested over 1,600 servings of those, and it eclipsed everything else. Root crops, in yellow, are the second largest category, followed by leafy greens, especially chard beet, greens, and kale, then cruciferous crops, which was almost entirely broccoli, and finally a mix of berries, eggs, buckwheat, and legumes, making up the remaining servings. Those of you who have watched this series and have sharp eyes might have noticed I finally showed the buckwheat servings. That was one of my major experiments this year to see if I could produce grain and whether or not it was worth doing. I harvested it gradually all the way through September and into October, and it took me forever to harvest, clean, winnow, and weigh all of it. I'm glad that I did it. I will probably do an entire video just on the buckwheat as a topic. I'm not going to do it again. For me, the return on hassle was just too low. I did get a really nice harvest off of it, and you'll see from a caloric perspective, it was a huge bump to the total yield out of this system. But for how we eat and the amount of time that I have available, just not worth it. Let's move to that calorie view. In total, I have harvested almost 240,000 calories out of this system as of the end of October, and you can probably already see the difference between which ones produced a majority of the servings versus which ones produced the most calories. Going back to a Marimekko view, but now of calories, you can see that the buckwheat did yield a huge calorie contribution. That's that really big light brown rectangle on here. When we move from largest to smallest, from left to right, the root crops now make up the largest category, with sweet potatoes just edging out the paste tomatoes as my calorie leader. Those are followed by the fruiting crops, then nuts and seeds, that was almost entirely buckwheat, then legumes and eggs, with brassicas and leafy greens now making up the smallest category. All of those sweet potato calories were in spite of my losing a lot of that crop to vole damage. We eat and grow a lot of sweet potatoes. I use the Georgia Jet variety and I love it. This is my first year ever having voles invade the garden. Kind of like the buckwheat, I will devote an entire video to just the voles, how I was able to preserve even the somewhat damaged sweet potatoes, and the protection that I'm putting in place going forward. For now, just know that as I weighed these and did the calculations, those voles cost me about 15,000 to 20,000 worth of calories out of the system. Voles. As mentioned, I'm not trying to literally survive out of this garden. I eat meat, I cook with olive oil. None of that is getting produced in my backyard. But for the sake of a quasi-universal baseline, I do compare everything coming out of the system to the theoretical yield that would be required to have a year's worth of calories and a year's worth of nutrition. Here's a chart with that comparison. That star in the upper right would be a year's worth of calories and a year's worth of nutrients. When I say nutrients here, it's a median value that I calculate across 17 different key vitamins and minerals. You can compare that star and the yellow line to the green dots that mark my progress over time. You can see that in general, I've tracked higher on nutrition and lower on calories. At this point, I've hit 132 days worth of calories and 240 days of nutrition. And meanwhile, we're basically done with the active growing season. I am still in the process of shelling and weighing all of the dry beans, and those will give another big boost of calories to the final yield for the year, but nowhere close to 365 days. But that's fine, given that the goal of this system is to support a healthy diet, not to be completely self-sufficient. I will give a final update on the 2025 harvest amounts in early December when I do the November update. But for now, here's how we are stacking up, with the vitamin and mineral breakdown shown on the top part of the page in that light blue box, as well as energy and the macronutrient split of carbohydrates, protein, and fat shown towards the bottom in the light tan box. Not surprisingly, for a lot of plant-based foods and a dab of eggs, we are relatively low on calories compared to nutrients, and in particular, we're low on fat and sodium and high in vitamin C, vitamin A, and fiber. I feel like my doctor would be pretty happy with these numbers. Next month's update should show effectively the entire yield for the system for 2025. And I'll do a deeper dive of mapping that against my specific dietary goals as far as servings of every kind of crop that I'm hoping to get out of the garden, look through the implications of that, and talk about changes I'm going to make to my 2026 garden to better match my needs and the yield coming out of the garden. Later this year, I'd also like to do a video on the role of the garden in food security as well as grocery cost savings, because I do get a lot of questions on those two topics. Until then, I hope that this video series continues to be useful and interesting for my fellow data nerds out there. As a reminder, the full file with all of my detailed harvests and all of the nutritional data for the entire year is available to view through a link on my website, as is a free downloadable file with all of the data charts shown in this presentation and all of the charts I've shown throughout the year as I've done these progress updates. As always, if there's anything that I didn't mention, or if you have questions on anything that I did cover, please drop them below and I will do my best to respond. Until next time, thanks.